Willie Spuzzwill. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Newell, and I am the Tribal Community Member in Residence for the University of Connecticut. I am also a citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe, born and raised in the community of Madocmigook, known to English speakers as Indian Township, Maine. As we begin today's event, I would like to welcome everybody, and especially our guest, Phyllis Young. Before we get started, I would like to open the space we're all entering with a piece of music used in Wabanaki welcoming protocols I was blessed to learn at a young age. It's one of several welcome songs we use to welcome guests into our homelands, and as a member of the Yukon Native community, I offer this song to all of you as a sign of welcome. Aguanoda, Ali Aguanoda, Aguanoda, Ali Aguanoda. Oh, oyane, oh, oyane, oh, oyane. Oh, oyane, oh, oyane, oh, oyane. Aguanoda, Ali Aguanoda, Aguanoda, Ali Aguanoda. Oh, oyane, oh, oyane, oh, oyane. Oh, oyane, oh, oyane, oh, oyane. Tao, Jubilee one, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome again, everyone. My name is Sage Phillips, and I'm a member of the Penobscot Nation with traditional ancestral homelands in the current day state of Maine. My family comes from the Wabanaki people and the Fisher Clan. Currently, I am the graduate supervisor of the Native American cultural programs, and I am pursuing my master's in human rights. In addition to working at NACP, I have completed a research project on Yukon's history as a land-grant institution entitled Land Grab CT in partnership with NACP, the Dodd Center for Human Rights, and Greenhouse Studios. The talk today will run from 11:15 to 12 p.m. and then we will have a half hour for questions, which you can share in the chat. This event is being recorded. I would now like to introduce Samantha Gove, who will read the land acknowledgement. Sammy Gove is a Mashantucket Pequot tribal member, double majoring in sociology and human rights at the University of Connecticut. She is a student coordinator at NACP and the president of the Native American and Indigenous Students Association. As well as working for NACP, Sammy is currently working on research with Dr. Ryan Talbert to examine fatal police encounters against Native people in the United States, as well as working alongside Dr. Brendan Kane on a project promoting minoritized and Indigenous languages. Welcome, Sammy.
Good morning, friends and relatives. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Yukon stands is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scotiagook, Golden Hill Pagusset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Katapatiamu, thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. We are honored to gather today to learn from Phyllis Young. Phyllis Young is woman who stands by the water and woman who loves the water. She comes from the land of Sitting Bull, Ochedi Sakowan, the 7 council fires of the Great Sioux Nation, the predecessor sovereign of this territory. You may know her as Phyllis Young, coordinator of and spokesperson for the 2016 to 2017 peaceful protests against the $3.8 billion Dakota Access oil pipeline construction that desecrated her ancestors' ancient burial and prayer sites and threatens their land, water, and existence. In 1974, Phyllis co-founded Women of All Red Nations, the women's arm of the American Indian Movement. In 1975, she established the first International Indian Treaty Council office at the UN Plaza. 33 years later, Young was one of the authors of the precursor document that became the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. In 2007, the declaration was adopted by the General Assembly by a majority of 144 states in favor. Only 4 votes were cast against it: Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, 4 countries boasting high Indigenous populations. Phyllis served as a board director of the National Museum of the American Indian for 15 years. An enrolled member of Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, she leads the Lakota People's Law Project's #GreenTheRed campaign to bring renewable energy to the people of Standing Rock. We also have a special guest, SHANNON KRING, who is an Emmy-winning producer and director. Shannon's documentaries have been presented by dozens of governments, top international broadcasters, and institutions, including the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Smithsonian Institution Museum of the American Indian, NASA, MIT, and the British Museum. In 2016, to begin production on her latest featured documentary, End of the Line, The Women of Standing Rock. The film won the 2022 Hollywood Critics Association Television Award, Best Broadcast Network or Cable Documentary TV Movie, and took runner-up at the UK's prestigious 2022 Sanford St. Martin Awards. It was nominated for the National 2022 Emmy Award for Outstanding Social Justice Documentary. In 2018, Shannon became the first US director and only 3rd woman awarded backing by the Finnish Film Foundation in its 69-year history. She was recently nominated for Hollywood's highest screenwriting honor, the 2022 Humanitas Prize. Welcome back to UConn. We are so grateful that you can make the time to speak with us. Phyllis, I will now turn it over to you to share some of your thoughts on your lifetime's work of defending Indigenous peoples and all their human and more than human kin. Welcome, Shannon and Phyllis.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Chante was staying up here too, Zapi. Mini Tehiawi Hemachapi. Na Mini Yuha Najui Hemachapi. Those are my given names from my people and my family. I am Ihunktawa Dakota. Those are the northern part of Standing Rock. And then in North Dakota, I'm also Hunkpapa Lakota from Sitting Bull's band. And that is the horn of the buffalo. And as the horn of the buffalo, the Hunkpapa, which that literally means, we serve as the vanguard of the Sioux Nation. And as such, we have the responsibility to lead and to define and be the diplomats for the outside world. So I come here in friendship and in line with the new threshold that is for the common good of humanity. And my struggle is my evidence of who I am in the Western Hemisphere and the incredible odds that we have survived. So we have spent all of our lives defending our homeland and the resources that are derived from it, including the children. And so just, I'll try to be short and sweet, which I've never been in my life, and I have to do it in a good way, so I go accordingly. But we have been fighting the pipelines, the oil pipelines, 4 of them, since 2007. Standing Rock Tribal Council passed a resolution in 2007 opposing the 4 pipelines that were coming forward. The Northern Border Gas Line, which did go under the Missouri River in 1981, and then the Keystone, which went around Bismarck, North Dakota, and across the river and went down into Dakota Territory, primarily the Siston people in South Dakota. So the 3rd pipeline was the Keystone XL, which was bringing the crude from farther north in Canada, and was an international crossing that occurred that had more emphasis on the national priorities of the United States, as well as international crossings with 2 countries. So we were successful in getting President Obama to deny the permit for the Keystone XL the first time. Standing Rock aggressively opposed it. Keystone XL reissued their determination and went through to build through Cheyenne River south of us, and that was also defeated. So we marched in Washington and we opposed the Keystone XL. We were successful in stopping that major international crossing of the border and intrusion and invasion of our territory. So the 4th one was the DAPL, Dakota Access. We don't say it out because Dakota is who we are. That's our identity, that's our nationality, that is our council fire. And for them to take our names and use them for their benefit, for the almighty dollar, and desecration of our lands and our graves. So we just say DAPL, no DAPL. So those 4 pipelines were primary focus for our life struggle to keep them out of our territory. Major violations of the treaty, 1868 treaty, but primarily the boundaries of the 1851 treaty. So the Oceti Sakowin, which are the 7 council fires of the Sioux Nation, have 33 treaties with the United States, beginning in 1805 at Port Sandusky, Ohio, with Debilon Pike, extending 90 million miles westward. So we began in Ohio and Indiana, Illinois, and those are Illinois was a tribe, and so extending into Minnesota and North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, and so that all encompasses treaty territory and the original homelands of our people. So we had the longest standing court issue with the Black Hills and the 1868 treaty for 70 years in the U.S. court system. With in 1920 it was filed, and with that, under the Depredations Act, we were considered hostiles of the United States, and as such, we could not benefit from any claims that we were provided as due process. And having been denied that until President Obama declared that we were no longer prisoners of war, and that we could, as that new status, we were no longer hostiles, we were entitled to the claims. So we began to file the claims, and we continue in that process. So having fought the pipelines was really a transition for me, because I've been an activist all of my life, and going back to 1973 3 Wounded Knee happened at Oglala Nation. And because of the distress and the murders and the crimes against the people of Oglala Nation, the traditional chiefs came to Standing Rock and petitioned the council to host the International Indian Treaty Council as a new mechanism looking at the United Nations structure. So we embarked upon a campaign and hosted that. And I was a coordinator for that conference in June of 1974. And 2 objectives by the chiefs. One was to address the United Nations on our status and the depredations and the crimes against our people in a very desperate hour. And so the second objective was to create an embassy in our homeland to address the international status of treaties and the rights derived from that. So that with that, we established the International Indian Treaty Council. And in 1977, we were given the authority under the creation of non-governmental organization status, an NGO. Having gained those credentials in a 3-year period, we then co-hosted the International Conference on Land and Indigenous People in Geneva, Switzerland, which was the seat of the then Human Rights Commission. And I have to note that Eleanor Roosevelt helped to establish that commission back in the 1940s. So an American woman, so thank her for that. Great effort, humanitarian be it. So we mobilized and coordinated, and over 5,000 people attended that first conference in Geneva in 1977. And we began drafting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Coming from Standing Rock, I thought that it should be Lakota or Dakota, and I was told that no, there are natural peoples that are bigger. And so I said, okay, Indian. And they said, no, it's bigger than the Americas. So the outcome was the use of the word indigenous. So that was the phrase that was coined for going forward as an organizational structure. But for 37 years, we were at the UN drafting and including all natural peoples from all over the world, the Sami from the Scandinavian countries, the Maasai from Africa, the natural peoples from Japan, from all over the world. And so that is penned, established rules and protocols from the natural peoples. And we're very proud of that declaration. It has now been accepted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. It's a major tool for prior and informed consent. America needs to incorporate that and build upon a social impact assessment, a methodology that does not exist in the legal system in the United States, so that every American is afforded backyard and front yard consultation on any major development in the air, on the ground, subjacent, underground, and on the water, navigable and otherwise. So I think it's an incredible methodology that needs to be addressed, that almost occurred when the Exxon Valdez happened, disaster to the Tlingit people in Alaska. America almost incorporated that and did not do it. So as we move forward, that is a primary objective, not only for Indian country, for Lakotas, but for the entire country, and maybe an international principle at the highest level. So we go forward with clear objectives in the development and the struggle against the oil development, and that what major invasion of treaty territory. And so we have in 2007, Russell Means and myself delivered the UN document to the State Department in Washington, D.C., declaring the Republic of Lakota, the independent move to incorporate our own structural government, to include the language that was prohibited from 1910 to 1978. So we moved, gave that, and the State Department, of course, put it over to Interior. So there's still historical statements from Attorney General of the United States that support the concept of international principles that apply to the treaty status. And so we continue to push and shove against the mindsets of individual members of Congress or the Congress itself, who thinks they have plenary power, which they do not. The Supreme Court decision in 1980 that was for the taking of the 1868 treaty and the Black Hills was monetary gift, a monetary compensation. So that has never been accepted. That is, in our books, an unresolved treaty issue. And there is over $1 billion in the treasury for that we have never accepted. Our Black Hills are not for sale. Our land is not for sale, and our water stands to be addressed in any fora that we can address in the world, in the international community. So we have been diplomatic in addressing the United Nations, having dialogue, education for 40 years. And when the 4 countries of England, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States or Canada, when they opposed it, the chief sent a message to the United Nations, and it is documented in my testimony and my report to the UN system, that we would return home and that we would light our council fires. And that has great spiritual significance to our people, and asking all Indigenous people to join us. And so we did that in marching, in protesting, and from 1910, as I said, to 1978, where we were denied by US government policy from speaking our language, and all the policies that applied to our cultural survival. So having to march in 1972 in the Trail of Broken Treaties, submitting a 20-point document that was addressed to the US Congress by the great Senator Averesk from South Dakota. We thank you, and we appreciate you, and you're the living evidence of everything that we fought for in the 70s. We marched for religious freedom and child welfare. And in the process, we co-founded, Madonna Thunderhawk and I co-founded the Women of All Red Nations, specifically to address, at the direction of the traditional chief Fool's Crow from Oglala Nation, to address the sterilization of Native women that was occurring in this country. So we had to define ourselves, we had to organize, and we did it under the arm. We are the women's arm of the American Indian movement, to be very specific. in Lakota society, the chiefs have a very traditional role in what they do and what they say and how they proceed in our governance. We also have women's societies that only women can address reproductive rights. Only the women can speak about Roe versus Wade, and how we can defy it in Indian country. We can say we don't want it. It does not apply because we are a separate sovereign. So we need to have dialogue, more communication and education with the American women on this issue. So I think the tribunal on Roe versus Wade, I think a tribunal on water rights, I think a tribunal on the oil development, or many of the issues that we have to address. But I think it's critical for the women now in this new age. So in our struggle, we have gone to the US Congress. We worked with the US Congress for a moratorium that was established to stop the sterilization. Eventually, an act of Congress that prohibited the government from sterilization. Long story short, more people have been sterilized in Oceti Sakowin, both men and women. So we continue with that fight, and what injections mean across the board, from sterilization to COVID. And so we have our own issues that are very different from the American system. And so as Women of All Red Nations, as it was established to address specifically women's issues, at that time it was abortion, which was not an issue for us in that time and space, because we were decimated in terms of our numbers. It was critical that we address it, because we were not even 1% of the population in the United States at that time. We've since grown to like 2.5 million people now. So we went to the Congress for those 20 points, which included housing, education, the Indian Child Welfare Act. Standing Rock and Oglala Nation were founding tribes of Ikwa in the Indian Child Welfare Act. Whitey versus the state of Mississippi to get our children back from foster care and send people to prison for the crimes against children in adopted homes. And some of the children are now older, and a man just was released a few years ago after 45 years in prison with that Mississippi versus Standing Rock versus Mississippi. So it goes over decades and a lifetime struggle to ensure that we protect the generations. And we've been doing that very aggressively through the court system. So we've been in court, we've been to the Congress, and we continue to be at the United Nations. We petitioned with the NODAPL. We petitioned for a full hearing before the Organization of American States to talk about the oil that was happening, and to remind them why the OAS was created, was to address the indigenous populations in the Americas. So where the Western countries have dominated that forum for generations on the nation states in the hemisphere, not addressing indigenous issues at all. We're reminding them why that OAS was established, and to go back to the original principles and objectives for the protection and enforcement of laws for indigenous peoples and we are the majority in this hemisphere. So that is still, our attorney passed away. And so we're now seeking an attorney for addressing the UN legal process for a full-blown hearing on the oil company. So we, as I said, over the years, we continue to petition the courts, the Congress, the UN structure, and traveling the world to educate people about our existence and conspiracies to be free. As Russell Means had a great quote, we continue for the freedom of Leonard Peltier. We're asking you to support the lawyers who put him in prison, who are now marching for his freedom. So times have changed, and people have changed their minds. We know in the American Indian movement that Leonard Peltier did not kill those FBI agents. We are sure of that. We know, we were there. And those of us that have aged, we have not aged out. We are still in transition, and we will continue the life struggle for all of that. And I know that I have more critical issues. I don't know that you want to ask questions or interject anything here right now. Thank you.
I think we're a bit early for the questions segment. They, I think, wanted it to begin in a little bit here, maybe 10 minutes. But one thing that I think people would find very interesting to know is the concept of, when you're talking about all of these decades that you've been doing this work, the concept of Indian time and the natural time, because often I wonder how it is you are so patient, so diplomatic, and the importance not only of that patience and tolerance sometimes with things that you shouldn't have to be patient and tolerant about, but also of forming strategic alliances and relationships. If you could talk about that, I think that would be really interesting.
So in Indian country, we do have Indian time. In the American viewing of it, it's called, we're always late, we're a day late, $1 short. And so we put up with that. But actually, when you go back, and we have young people who are redefining our own space and our own time. So we're actually not in 2022, we're still actually at 2011. 1000. So there's the time factor, and it's real interesting because the younger people are redefining those time concepts and where we are. But in the struggles for the Black Hills in that 70-year period, in South Dakota, we had great partnerships, and I really want to acknowledge those who were our allies, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, those who were in the justice, peace and justice, and for particularly the Cowboys and Indians Alliance, the CIA, the partnership that we created with the Cowboys and the ranchers and people I never thought I would stand beside and petition the state of South Dakota on water. And then when you redefine it and you get clean drinking water, and it's affecting 20 million Americans on the last river system in the United States, it hits home. It hits home. So the No DAPL call, national call, really brought a strategic issue home, and that was Miniwichoni. water is life. And that is a deep, very deep concept of spiritual law that when we marched and demanded our treaty right to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, we defied the government policy the men did by sundancing. And that was prohibited for 60 years. So in 1970, when Chief Woolscroke had made a national call, he wanted to separate the sacred Sundance from the circus, because everybody gathered at the carnival, the powwow, the rodeo, and all the great happenings that were occurring once a year. The government policy was, you can have a dance, but it has to be at the agency and it has to be only one time a year. So we were still operating on the 1 year government rule, and Woolscroke wanted to separate that. And because the Sundance was a tourism, and granted it was a dance, but it was a social dance. And so you were safe. You were safe in education because it was the objective was to be a better American and learn English and accept their mindset for academic schools and systems. So we were authorized that freedom of religion. We're the only people in the world who were granted an act of Congress to guarantee our religious freedom. And so we took it back. And that was one of our responsibilities. And it wasn't just a God box on the street corner once a week. It was innate spirituality that was part of our governance, spiritual law. And so with the No DAPL, we were up against a campaign against us to be labeled jihadists. So the religious right, define us as you will, but we were fighting for 40 years. And when 1978, we co-founded Women of All Red Nations to incorporate and to demand. We visited the prisons. We stopped the cutting of the hair. I did the prisons in North Dakota. Madonna Thunderhawk did the prisons in South Dakota. We demanded that they be allowed to pray and speak our language. We had, I think, 70 carloads of American Indian movement to come to Cannonball in 1975. The years of defiance were from 1970 to 1978, very significant. The Sundance was held at Crow Dog's Paradise, and as well as at the Greengrass, where the Sacred Calf Pipe is held. So eventually we moved to Wind Cave, which is our place of beginning. We have 7 sites in the Black Hills that are sacred. And our ceremonies are at the solstice periods in sync with the constellation of the stars. The bear has significance to what Americans call Devil's Tower. Oftentimes they didn't understand the spiritual things that were happening and the portals that were open that we understood and we defined. So that is Matotipila. And so the constellation with the bear is in sync with the ceremonies that happened there and continues that. So that's another thing that we have to fight for in our sacred homeland, because we're being inundated by populations to Rapid City, South Dakota. All Americans are coming there, and people from all over the world. So to live there. And so we're experiencing that right now. And we need to protect those sites. We need protection. We don't need buffer zones. We need protection for those sites. We are tied to the landscape. No other people are tied to the landscape as we are for our sacred sites to worship. We have the right to worship freely, openly, in our language, and to gather, to be there. So we're not part of the American system where we have to adhere to the God box on the street corner on the schedule of once every Sunday, on Sabbath, or name it. We have it every day. From the time we wake up, we pray to the morning star, we pray to the evening star. We believe in the Wakia Oyate, and that is the sun, that's a natural energies, rain, snow, and we're in the age of women divine. So those are all blessings, and those are the thunder beings, and those are our gods. And what they relate to us is their power. And when it rains, it's a blessing. It's not that terrible weather out there, or, oh, shucks, it's raining, darn it. It's a real negative mindset. And for us, it's a blessing. When it snows, be ready for that terrible snowstorm. We had 6 of them during the No Dapple, and we endured it. And those military veterans that came, the No Peace for Peace veterans, and they experienced all of that. And so those are our powers. And we have, we Lakotas, the 7 council fires, we are sun worshipers, and we were denied that sun worshiping for 60 years. So when we recreated the codes and the protocols, unwritten law, traditional law, we incorporated all of the underground principles, mysteries, and secrets that were held by our medicine people. Still interpretation of thought in our language, who kept the language underground alive. We owe it desperately to our own people who preserved and reserved our right to speak our language, and never were educated in academic fields, but maintained the language and the base line of our knowledge. So Lilo Wopila Tanka, to those people who did that for us. And those were the freedom thinkers who transcended their power, their might, and their knowledge to the new generation who were more colonized. And I say that about myself because I was a good American for 40 years. And for the last 30 years, 30 years, have been to be a good Lakota, because the Congress adopted the American Indian Religious Freedom in 1978. And we were defying it by holding sun dances and attending and thanking those men who were not afraid to defy that policy, because Congress could not pass an act prohibiting our religion. So it was only policy. So we defied it. And so when you consider those 40 years, it was a growing period for us in our infancy, and then our adolescence, and then our adulthood. So when you come to Dapple, it's not the collective memory of trauma or war based on the American acts of war that occur in the Cold War. So we were full-grown adults as a nation, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. And so all those years, Oglala Nation petitioned the systems. And so when you move forward, we were Ochete Shakowi. We made a call to all of our council fires, the 7 council fires. We brought them to the camp at Ochete Shakowi that we created there. And we brought all the council fires and we lit those fires, calling upon the spirits of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull and Bindaloria, who is one of the top 7 theologians in the world, who was the crown of academic in our country. So, and Russell Means, who was shot at the Boulevard path where all the flags were in 1975. We knew that they were all there and we brought them back. So we opened the portals and we welcome the spiritual ancestors to come and help us. So we're now embarking upon the violations of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves and Protection Act, those 26 graves that were defied by the No DAPL when they came in with the dogs. And so we had great partnerships that came there. 416 indigenous nations from all over the world. And then we had 30 countries and Americans from all over, and incredible effort financially. I think there's like $50 million that were generated there. And we opened Standing Rock. We walked on April 1st of 2016, opening the Sacred Stone Camp by LaDonna Allard, who was a historian and a genealogist for Standing Rock. And by August, we had 10,000 people there. And then by December 4th, we had 13,000 people. And Veterans for Peace, there were 3,000 who came from all over the country and supported us. That was a glorious moment because my grandfather was a code talker, one of 47 from Standing Rock, who did not get the acclaim or the pomp and circumstance because those records were classified until 2010 and until President Obama officially gave 47 medals to Standing Rock. We also had 17 code talkers in the Second World War, great heroes. We have an uncle from Standing Rock who received the silver parachute for his jumps in Sicily, in Normandy, and in Holland, I think. So, who were part of the greatest humanitarian efforts for humanity in the Second World War. I'm very proud of my family who were in the military, but especially thankful for that glorious day, December 4th, 2016, when the Veterans for Peace came. Incredible. It was dark. We waited for them all day, and there were like 200 or 300 car lights, and we had our own drone, so we have that picture of them when they were arriving. And that was December 3rd. And when December 4th, President Obama denied the permit. So short time period there, but lessons learned in the past, no matter how short the victory, celebrate. So we celebrated from December 4th. Christmas, incredible time that we had. And thank you so much to the United States military veterans who lived their oath for domestic. Major issue in the Congress today. I urge all Americans to give credence to those who served in honorable in their efforts for the freedom of this country and the democratic principles that we all have to support and continue. So over time, we made great friends, partnerships. That was a new threshold because it addresses humanity. And it wasn't just about being at Geneva saying, I'm a Lakota, I'm a Dakota, and the whole world is too. And I'm an Indian, and this applies to Indians only. New entire international principle, and and universal, that necessity for Mother Earth to be cleansing. She is cleansing herself in the greatest efforts of womanhood. Mother Earth is cleansing herself, which is a natural phenomenon that we have to respect and understand why she's defending herself. But she also needs to be nurtured and to preserve the spiritual concept of water. All living things are born in water. And we believe that the power of women comes from the stars. We come from Star Nation. And at Oceti Shakoi Camp, we welcomed all humanity because we're not the only ones who come from the stars. Humanity is derived from stardust. We all come from that, and that was the commonality that we created, the universal standard and the connection that we had with everyone. So very grateful for that time. I want to especially acknowledge the Cowboys and Indians Alliance from 1985 that we helped establish in partnership with those organizations, those cowboys who were part of everything. We defeated the SHANNON Pipeline in 1980, and we defeated the Union Carbide for the uranium mining in 1980 in partnership with Cowboys and Indians Alliance, the railroads, the farmers. We can do it as a group, as the CIA, the Cowboys and Indian Alliance. Praise and honor to them who helped us in partnership together. We have had successes. And when you have a taste of that diplomacy, that partnership, that democracy, and a taste of that freedom, you never settle for less. So it's that positive action, the drive and the struggle for decency, for humanity, we endure, and we move, and we will thrive.
Thank you, Phyllis. So I'm going to address a few of the questions here. One of the things that we were asked to talk about is the importance of making kin, and to explain how Phyllis and I know one another, and how this relates to the non-Indigenous students that you have. So to make a very long story brief, I was living and working in Honduras. I was living there full time in San Pedro Sula. I was dealing with Indigenous issues, the same exact issues that exist here, that exist everywhere in the world, where there are resources that are wanted by the westernized world. And I had been deeply honored, one of the greatest honors of my life, actually, to have been asked to conduct the final interview of Russell Means, Phyllis's brother, who was just an extraordinary person. If you've not heard of him, you need to look him up, Russell Means, and all that he did for really the country and the world. And so I did that in 2012, and I met Pearl Means, his widow, and we became just almost instantaneously the closest friends. And we formed a partnership that went so far past friendship and work partnership in bringing forth important issues of our time. We realized the importance of forming relationships, as Phyllis and her people have always known, that it's so important to form alliances and to work together and to find every way you can to get in any door, to get any seat you can at the table to make a difference. And so Pearl and I had that relationship for years. And when I was in Honduras, my parents kept sending me information about what was happening here at Standing Rock, where we are today. And I saw those same issues. And eventually my father said, and I'll clean up his words. He said, what the, are you still doing in Honduras when this is happening in your own backyard? And Pearl and I decided to come to Standing Rock. And the decision was made very quickly. It was 24 hours from the time that she was actually struck by lightning, and where I received a dream that I don't think was really a dream, where Russell came and said to go to Standing Rock. The significance of Pearl being struck by lightning, by the way, Russell said he would come back as lightning. And so we knew we had to go to Standing Rock. And she said, we have to go and meet Phyllis. And so right as soon as I got here, it was Phyllis that I was introduced to. And the more I learned about her story, I was just blown away. After one day of filming, because we came as a documentary crew, I realized at the end of the day that all but 2 interviews were with women. I didn't understand at that time that the women were the guardians, the protectors of the water, and that the men, that their role was to support the women in this important work. And so at the end of the first day, I said to Pearl, I said, I think this documentary we're making is supposed to just be about the women. And she said, duh, yes, that is the story. And so I got to meet so many extraordinary women that I didn't know previously. And yet we had so many of the same experiences, so many of the same missions, really. And I learned at that point about the Lakota way of making kin. And I can't tell you how now, it seems like it was decades ago, but it was just in 2016 that I met all of these extraordinary people here at Standing Rock. You know, we've become family. And for the people that are asking, how can I be a part of these issues? I'm not Native, not Indigenous at all. First of all, one of the most wonderful things I learned here at Standing Rock was white is not a skin color, it's a state of mind. I thought, that's a good one. And so now I'm so honored to be a Hunka relative of Phyllis's. I was also adopted by Lula Red Cloud, the great-great-granddaughter of Chief Red Cloud from the Oglala Nation. And I take it very seriously, the things that I've been tasked with to help with. And I every day just ask how I can be a better servant to these issues. And so I would love for Phyllis to talk about this notion of making kin. What does that mean? And how can the people who are here in this discussion, who wonder how they can support, help, how they can be a part of something, the many things that you do, how can that best happen?
I believe that when we took back our spirituality, we had a natural system, and our governance was wo'ope, and that is the formal spiritual law that applies to our governance. That's the traditional law, that's the unwritten law, and she's a female. So wo'ope, defined in our language, is first of all, wo, if you put W-O in front of Dakota, wo Dakota, wo Lakota, wo Nakota, it means peace. But Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota means friend or ally. We have an incredible language that is totally spiritual and flowery and lovely. And so when I talked about the process of our struggle, how we assumed that after the law was passed, we freely, openly, and my son was one of the sun dancers, the first legal sun dance in 1978. He was 8 years old. And so when you talk about Wope, that you talk about Dakota, it means friends. And then you talk about Wo Dakota, Wo Lakota, that means peace. Well, when you talk about Wope, it's the natural compassion of women. She's a female, Wope, the governance of our people, the spiritual law. So when we have an entire system and history, a universal standards and a pluralistic society that we started to promote. And we now have a hard drive on the 7 belief, or the 7, what you would understand would be like 7 sacraments, the 7 values and a belief system that we had in place for hundreds, thousands of years. And one of them, first of all, I said at the camp, is treat everyone alike. And it's so positive. It's not, we don't discriminate. You're prohibited from discriminating, and American system is written to in a negative sense. So the penalty system, the penal codes that are developed are all criminal prohibitions. Our system is very spiritual. So when you say treat everyone alike, we incorporated that whole collective memory of freedom, of interpretation of our thought. We were not, the military, the young people, that even my children were defiant, and they wanted to go march, and they wanted to fight, and they wanted to defy the rules of the camp, which were based on peace. So we incorporated those concepts that we took back in 1978, and we had to put them in practice. And granted, we opened a massive can of worms, because we had to establish protocol and rules, and our people were not acceptable to that when they were trained with a mindset to be violent Americans. And so that was the most difficult time that I had as coordinator at the camp, was to enforce the peace. No guns. We had to remove 2 or 3 people who had weapons, and so we had a strict security. But that was one of the tenets, the 7 tenets of our value system, and that was to treat everyone alike. And so trying to reinforce the peace that should prevail at Oceti Sakowin, and then to create or reestablish the Oceti Sakowin was something that had not happened in 140 years. So it predated the literacy world, the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and it was traditional law, and it was oral society and a visual. So we had to incorporate the ancient principles and standards of Wope. And from Wope, we had to follow the rules for the struggle for our water, and Miniwichoni, which is spiritual law that applies to birth of all living things and our Mother Earth. So with that comes, the next one is called Hunka. It's H-U-N-K, with, it's like hunk, but an A at the end. But it's the adoption of relatives. And I used to say, we're the only people in the world that can choose and pick our relatives, because you have a good person in your life, or someone that does an honorable deed for your family, someone who stays with you and is loyal to your family. So then
That's housekeeping here at the Prairie Knights Casino. Excuse me a second.
so that's adoption. So we have adoption in, we don't have adoption out. So we use that concept to promote our right with Indian child welfare. And the traditional code, which we do have the unwritten word, we have now written it, and we do have a traditional law that is derived from that. So when you make and each one of these 7 tenets has a ceremony. So we have a ceremony. Oftentimes we are very quick. We have to offer tobacco to the medicine man or to a family elder, and they come and they sing the 4 directions song, and they acknowledge a new relative. So we have incredible pomp and circumstance and ceremony and prayer, and we try to incorporate that. And so it's beautiful to see that occurring across the land, because everyone is exercising their spirituality. And so we have adopted Shannon because of her work, her diligence, her commitment, her sacrifice for coming to our camp and for documenting it. And so we also realized that we had to create the objectives of digital democracy. And for me, it was a new thing because I always hid from the camera because the FBI was always looking for us. And so I wasn't front and center. I was a technician. I was a drafter, did the work very seriously. But I felt at a time like this, we needed to utilize the social media in a good and positive way. My prayers and my are always for
Myron
Dewey, who was the drone operator who faced felony charges at the camp and who used his drone as his own evidence in his trial, and all the charges were dropped. So there were a lot of adoptions at the camp. We adopted veterans. They had never known of the ceremony for healing, so we had healing ceremonies. We gave feathers for the service that they did to in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. We honored those who did come and support us. And so adoption is about kinship. And unfortunately, the Indian Child Welfare Act uses kinship terminology again it confuses us, because we assume because we have kinship that the law will apply accordingly, but they use kinship as a term for the adopted family that is entitled to benefits and payment. So having gone through the process for Indian child welfare, we encourage adoption within our own people. We have a incredible need for foster homes. We've been trying. It's one of the hardest programs because of the human behavior, the human interaction. So we're trying to set the academic standards for social worker. And so there's a whole lot to this kinship rule. I don't like to use it, the American term kinship, but hunka is accepting someone into our family. And it's deeper than just an adoption on paper. It's a spiritual connection. So you have to honor that. You can't just terminate it and undo it. And some people have tried it when they realize that one child didn't like that person. So we're going through a lot of experiences, but we hold very sacred those 7 tenets, particularly Hunka. And so I have Hunka from Europe. I have Hunka and Americans and from different countries. And I have mentors that led the paths in the work at the United Nations. So those are primarily women that I have adopted as sisters, nieces, and children. So I'm the ina, or the mother, to many people who have come into our lives. And then my children, I have 8 children, so they have Hunka. So we have a pretty extensive family, and we have created objectives for the Hunka in foster care. And the traditional law is that we have to provide economically for them. It's not based on the state of South Dakota, 20,000 per child, 20 for adoption, 20,000 for special needs. All children in South Dakota are considered special needs to provide for that incentive that the non-Indian families require. So kinship is so special, so sacred. And then when you interpret the word for child, wakan isha, wakantanka is God. So wakan isha is sacred being. So we're trying to recreate, reestablish, and renew the care of children that has been taken away from us by removing children. So we're focused on Indian child welfare. We adopted a grandmother's code in 2008 and principles and standards for the unwritten law. So the Supreme Court case in Texas will have no bearing on our intrinsic court that we're establishing. We're establishing an international indigenous court. We have 2 justices. One is from Hawaii. They are both international lawyers, teachers, and they serve as the initial justices for the indigenous court that we're working on.
I think we're about out of time, and I know we had a couple of questions.
We can go over a little bit, and I just want to thank you both for that brilliant commentary. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for bringing your story to us. And for those that don't know, Standing Rock was and still stands as the largest ever Native American protest in the history of this country. A turning point for a lot of people. And I know when I worked at the Pequot Museum, it was so moving that Native peoples from across the country were going there, and even from the community here in Mashantucket, several of the people I worked with went out to support the movement. And the bringing together of documentary films is something that I also have personal experiences with as well. This last question is really, kind of more for Phyllis, and this is a question I often get asked as well in the work that I do. Standing Rock being, as powerful a moment as it was, in 2022, we're looking at things like the challenge to the Indian Child Welfare Act in the Supreme Court. And we're looking at Harvard Peabody Museum of Archaeology, releasing information that they've been holding a collection of 700 children's hair samples that were collected during the residential school era, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, etc. And the question really is how, do you keep the faith? How do you keep going forward, even with these modern day challenges we're still facing?
So I always look for my inner internal tribulations. And so I have a grandmother who was, her grave was found about 4 or 5 years ago in the Black Hills Cemetery. and she disappeared in 1918. And so we're going through a healing process of for this, very private, very personal. She was 18 years old and they found 45 graves, and they petitioned the tribes for identification. My grandmother was one, it's my grandfather's sister. And so I was able to go there and hold a memorial, and the rite of passage was denied as part of that policy, prohibiting customs. So we were able to sing her song. She did have a name given by our family, which was Carrie's her own. And so we were able to sing her song and sing her to her journey and complete her transition. We fed the traditional food, wasna. We put out 4 little chairs for little girls with shawls and dresses, and we went through the customary grieving, feeding her spirit, and exercising those things. And with the repatriation, we've asked, we have a petition to Congress for an amendment to NAGPRA, which will include the lands, the graves, and the funerary objects for the boarding schools, to include the boarding schools and all private lands where there are graves found. And so we're initiating a campaign. I also have a grandfather who was 15 who is missing from Carlisle, and Carlisle holds the military school. The college still holds 750 graves of Ocheti Shakoi, the more than any other group. So we're having dialogue and exchange internally on what people want. Some people do not want to disinter. They want to leave it there and request that a memorial be established there. And some people want their relatives disinterred. I'm still on an active search for my grandfather's body. We may have found it in New York across the line, but the Mennonites were the farmers that were active at that time. And so he went to 3 Mennonite families. So they think that he may have expired when he caught typhoid, and he was actually running away from the family that were dying from the typhoid. So he was trying to save himself, and he was farmed out. So we're still looking for him. So I have those personal experiences, but Standing Rock was one of the founding tribes for NAGPRA as well, because of the graves that happened in the flooding. So we have an amendment before Congress. We need to find some partners to get that amendment to address the hair issues. The hair is incredible because it serves as our memory in our DNA and the connections to our bloodlines, our mothers and our relatives and the people that we come from. So we were looking at all those. I was gifted. I got a call from the Santa Fe market, and there was a winter count, and our family is looking for, we had 5 winter counts, and we found 4 of them, one in the British Museum, one in the Field Museum in, I think it's in
Minneapolis,
Phoenix. Minneapolis.
Isn't the field?
There's one in Phoenix so we found 4. We're looking for the 5th one, but in those, in that there was a buffalo hide that was for sale at the Santa Fe market. And they wanted like $7,000. And they called me and asked me if I was interested because it was the boarding school. It's made from wase and the different, it's not modern oil, or it's from the 1940s. It's a winter count, and it's all boarding school. And I've seen these men just break down and cry when they see this. So it was paid for by an individual. And so we brought it to the Rosebud Sundance, because Rosebud was just reburying their children, 9 children that they brought home. And that was the largest gathering I've ever seen our people. I went there thinking I was late to be at 1 o'clock. And I learned a long time ago that the time difference, the Indian time, the time and space that we have, it was like 10 hours later that they finally got to the event that was happening. So I was there actually 9 hours early, but we took it there. We had it blessed at the Sundance. We took it through 300 people that viewed it. And so it's going to be a traveling exhibit. It's going to the Yankton Reservation at their request. And then it's going to the Cherokee Museum in Oklahoma. I don't know the time factors that they want to keep them, but I've offered to create that exhibit at the request. It's going to Canada for the schools, and it's an incredible Buffalo winter count of the boarding schools. And so we're looking for a grant to fund the transport of it and create we're creating 26 women who will be the society that will oversee that exhibit display, road to road, camp to camp, and wherever they want it. It will be used to, hopefully we'll take it to the Congress and show them in part of our record keeping. We're in the second phase. Of the boarding school issues. We've gone through the discovery. We're continued the discovery of more graves, and ask representatives to come forward and carry that name for those who don't have family. And October 10th, we had dedication of a new grounds, a new park, memorial park for those who died there in the schools. And then we have a statue, and my grandmother is depicted on there along with a man, a woman, a boy, and a girl. So that will be dedicated as soon as it's finished, and it will be in the park in the Black Hills in Rapid City. So we're doing NAGPRA. We're doing what we can. We're just now we're in phase 2, the storytelling. We're asking all people to tell their story, to document it, to put it on tape, to video it, to write it, to make oral statements at every level, so that all of us individually, I always say the hourglass, so that we have the collective right that is priority and primary, and then you get to the center. It's very difficult even for me to talk about my childhood removal from the building of the dams. And so then you go back out to your collective. So using that hourglass to monitor your feelings and your stories. So we're at the storytelling. We're tell your story to Congress. We're doing a video in January for a real horrific case of boarding school in South Dakota. So Shannon and I are working on a partnership with that. So we go forward addressing those issues, and we're very active in the communities.
So we will share some of our new work when we come. We're actually coming to UConn in April. I'm sure you'll all get the details. Unfortunately, American Airlines and housekeeping do not operate on Indian time. And so I need to run. And we're really looking forward to seeing everyone in April. And we're hoping that we can be there long enough that we can continue this discussion and move things forward in a meaningful way. But we're really grateful for your continued support of the work of these amazing women of Standing Rock. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in person soon.
I just got to get a promotion in here. We have a new movie called Lakota Nation versus the United States. It's hitting the movies in November, December. Please see it, support it, and ask for. It's a documentary of our struggle. My story is about Geneva and the United Nations. So please support Lakota Nation versus the United States. Thank you.
Thank
Wo
you.
pila.